Thank you very much, Chairman. Okay, that's fine. All the technology is set. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much, Joe, for the invitation. And I suppose I'd like to open by congratulating you on the event. The coverage, the media coverage during the week when I was back at work has been phenomenal, even better than previous years, if that's possible. So really well done to everybody, you and all those who are supporting you. And thanks again for the invitation. I'm going to talk about a number of issues, and hopefully it will stimulate some interest and questions, and I'd be happy then to take questions in relation to it. They say that you can only get 4 messages across in any presentation. So I'm not going to risk it at this early hour of the day. I'm only going to give you 3 messages. So I'm going to talk about the rationale for renewables, which has been very much in the public debate in recent times. I'm going to talk a little bit about electricity pricing, which is close to everybody's heart. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what ESB can and is doing about stimulating our sector of the economy. So let's kick off by talking about renewables. Everybody knows, you know, the renewables, I suppose, that are out there, the various forms. I suppose the reality, I suppose, is wind is the big one, and a lot of research and development going on into other technologies like solar, biomass, wave, tidal, and heat pumps, you know, coming very much into the fore. But I suppose the one that is really sort of racing ahead at the moment is the wind sector. The whole issue about renewables is, first of all, we'll come back to this when talking about the price of electricity, but we do not have any natural source of energy. You know, we have peat that we've burnt for some time. People might have mixed views on that, but that will have a limited lifespan. And everything else, all the fossil fuels that we have are imported. There is no other European country that is so dependent on imported fossil fuels than us. You know, over 90% of our electricity is generated from imported fossil fuels. And the absolute reality of that, even though we're in recession, the recession will last longer than any other recession, but we'll come out of it. But the absolute reality is that fuel will go up again. It will definitely go up again. And in our sector, you know, you can't look at 1 or 2 or 3 years. You have to look at long term, and you have to plan long term. So when fuel goes up, and with that, the whole drive in relation to the environment is going to drive the cost of carbon up as well. And when you get to that stage, then renewables come into their own. Now let me just give you a small example in relation to that. When fuel went really high, you know, which is probably about, you know, about 12 months ago now, fuel went really high. People that we had given long-term contracts to for wind projects were coming back saying, we want out of the contracts, we want to compete in the open market, because wind was then competitive. So wind has already been competitive. Okay, it's supported now because fuel has dropped dramatically. But renewables will be competitive in an environment where fuel goes up and carbon goes up, and you've got to plan for the long term. When that could happen, price of fuel changes virtually overnight. You cannot build an electricity infrastructure overnight. You've got to plan for the long term. The other issue that it gives us, if we build and develop renewables, is its security of supply. We eventually get away from what has strangled us for years, is having this total dependence on imported fossil fuels. So those, you know, are the big issues. And if you have, you know, a native source of energy, of electricity, then it gives you price stability in the longer term. So if you look today, you say fuel is way down, wind can't compete, we have to support wind. That's all true. But you cannot look at these things in the shorter term. This is the commitment that ESB has made in relation to the strategy that we announced. And what we are aiming to do is to make ESB produce electricity by 2035 without producing CO2. And because 2035 is such a long way away, even though Europe has set 2050 as its target, we're well ahead of that. We have set interim targets 2012 and 2020 when we would make substantial cuts in CO2, and we're on target to do that. And we've also committed to having 33% of our portfolio by 2020 in renewables. This just gives you a snapshot of the input that renewables have in the various sectors, the electricity, heat and transport. The red is transport, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. In terms of wind in Ireland, we have about 1,000 megawatts of wind connected at the moment. My eyesight is so bad I can't even see the screen in front of me, so unfortunately I'm going to have to, but I know all these numbers off by heart, of course. But we have about 1,000 megawatts connected, and by 2020 it's estimated that we'll have 5,000 megawatts. Now, just to give you sort of a little bit of background on that, there's a number of mechanisms they call Gate 1, Gate 2 and Gate 3, and the offers for Gate 3 are sort of going out at the moment. But you can see the amount of wind development that is proposed for Ireland, and the size of the sort of renewable sector that we're looking at. And this gives you just a sort of a graphical picture of exactly where it is. And in order to sort of make the connection easier, it is being done in blocks now, so that you can actually try and sort of make the infrastructure easier to build to connect up wind. This just gives you a picture, and it's interesting, of what the amount of wind that you have in Europe generally, in the Nordic countries, which people speak a lot about wind, in the UK, and then what Ireland has in terms of the percentage of total installed capacity. Now, the red is installed, the green is in progress, and the yellow is the future. Will all of this be built? Well, probably not. It's difficult to get money now. Money is expensive. But you can see the scale at which and the pace at which we are moving in this particular area, and I suppose the support that the whole wind sector has got. This is ESB's target. Our target is to have 600 megawatts of onshore wind in Ireland by 2012, 200 megawatts in Great Britain, and 1,400 megawatts by 2020. We are investing in research and development and other technologies. We've committed to investing 4 billion in renewables over the next 15 years, and our target is to have 33% of ESB's portfolio in renewables by 2020. So, in summary, in relation to that particular message, today the renewable sector is supported. We accept that. But just take a very short period in our sector, in the energy sector, take a 10-year time scale and ask anybody, any analyst, what will the price of fuel be at that time? And you will see that the whole drive towards renewables makes sense in every sector for ESB, in terms of carbon, in terms of the environment, in terms of security of supply, having our own source, and in terms of stability and pricing. The last piece about the amount of renewables that we're building here, it has got to go hand in hand with interconnection. And we've been talking about interconnection for years. In 2003, I offered to build the interconnector to the UK and hand it over, lock, stock and barrel, to whoever government wanted, but there was concerns about the whole issue of dominance and it didn't happen, and we're still talking about it. We have a new target of 2012. All I'm saying is that in this whole package, for us to develop that amount of wind on our small system, we need interconnection. We need to be connected to the UK grid to make it one grid, and I believe that will happen, needs to happen faster. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about pricing, I suppose, which everybody has a real keen interest in. And this just shows you how this sort of market works in Ireland. We have a pool, we have a load of generators here on the left-hand side, and these are the suppliers who supply you. And in between, we have a grid that just moves it from one place to the other. So it's a very complex arrangement, and the technicalities of it are complex, but the simple message is people make it, they sell it to a pool, suppliers buy it, and they sell it to you. And that's basically how it all works. But there's, so you don't have to worry too much about the deep technicalities about it. It's a pool system. Now, suppliers can have contracts with their own, because all of these people, not all of them, some of them have supply companies as well, and they can contract directly with their supply company. ESB cannot yet, anyway. It is my hope that one day we will be able to. So we will be able to drop the price of electricity, but at the moment, because competition is growing, we're not allowed to do that. And this gives you an idea of how the price of electricity is made up. So you see the red piece is generation, and of that piece, half is fuel. So because we import all the fuel, we are totally dependent in terms of our electricity price on how the international price of fuel varies, and you can see that it fluctuates a lot. Now, people actually lock in, because the amounts of money involved in buying fuel are so enormous. When it comes to summertime, people lock in for the following year. And a lot of the sort of annoyance around the issues with big suppliers is If you lock in at a high price, then you're locked in. It's like locking in your mortgage at a fixed rate. And generally when people lock in at a fixed rate and go against them, they're not pleased, and it's everybody else's fault but their own. So if you lock into a contract for 1 year or 2 years, it's the very same as locking in your mortgage at a fixed rate. There's no way out of it until your contract runs out or you get an opportunity. The interesting thing about that is that when fuel prices are really rising and markets are on the up, people are desperate to lock in. They all want to lock in. When they're falling, they don't want to lock in. They feel it's going to fall more. So you have all this sort of mix of people. If you lock in when the price is down, when people have done that over the last 6 to 9 months, have really, really done well, and really have, in the industrial sector, cheap electricity. Those who locked in the 6 months before that, when fuel were high, are obviously suffering. Now, there's a myth that I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk a little bit about, is that the price of electricity in Ireland is amongst the highest in Europe. Everybody says it. And one thing to sort of clarify in relation to that is, there's 2 million customers in Ireland. 300,000 of them don't use electricity. So they pay just a standing charge. We are one of the countries, not all countries have a standing charge. Some of them spread it over the entire usage. We have a standing charge. The 300,000 are made up of empty houses, holiday homes. In the old days, farmers would have got a connection to their house and to their outbuildings. Most of those connections still there. Electric fences had dedicated supplies of their own, very seldom used now, but all still there. So there's about 300,000 customers who only pay the standing charge. Now, if you include those in the lower use, you are going to get a completely distorted view of what the electricity price is. So you've got to look at the average. And if you look at the average, you will see that this is the domestic sector, that even though domestic prices in Ireland are above the average, it's barely above the average. And you have countries like Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Denmark, much higher in the domestic sector than Ireland is. So take the average and you'll see that in the domestic sector we're a little bit above the average, but not much. The very same applies in the commercial sector. And you can see there that countries like Belgium, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Italy, are above or similar to Ireland in that particular sector. And if you look to the left of that, Spain, they have a 15 billion subsidy in the system because they grew that subsidy time and time. Believe it or not, the utilities sold that subsidy, which was a commitment from the government to pay it back, to the banks. And you can imagine the difficulties that's creating at the moment. But others on the left-hand side, lots of them have nuclear or hydro or combinations of both. But again, in the commercial sector, we're above the European average, but not much above it. Our problem is in the jobs sector. And this is the picture for the industrial electricity, that we're way above the European average in the industrial sector. Now, back in the 1990s, there was virtually only one supplier, it was ESB. And at that time, we weren't investing in renewing the network, but the prices were the lowest in Europe. And everybody sort of harks back to that time. But one of the things that we did at that time that nobody ever knew, because there was only one supplier, we made our submission to government. They didn't give us a price increase for 15 years anyway, but we skewed the tariff towards the industrial sector so that we could keep the industrial sector, and the job creation sector at its lowest possible level. When we went open market, it has to be open book, and everything is sort of done in accordance with regulation, and that's what you see, that cost reflective tariff, as they call it. Now look at our competitors, at what they do. If you look at Denmark, Germany, Holland, places like that, the green is where the price of domestic electricity is compared to the European average. The blue is where the price of commercial electricity is, commercial businesses compared to the European average. But get to the job sector, the red sector, and you see where they are. Now, everybody has known this in the energy sector for a long time. People may not have known that we actually sort of dealt with this in our own way in the 90s when it was just one supplier. And even sort of our former ESB colleague in Bordgosh, John Mullins, has been talking about this recently, and it got fairly well slated on the basis that he was suggesting that we load the domestic sector to bring down the industrial sector. And I'm not suggesting that we do that, but over an extended period of time, we should look at this Irish picture on the left-hand side and try and get a better balance on it. I mean, it's not going to happen this year, I can guarantee you that. But if we took it over a longer time, we because we're so dependent on imported fossil fuels, should be more protective of the industrial jobs creation sector. So finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what ESB, as somebody indicated to me recently, that ESB is now the second most valuable company in the state after CRH. The banks used to be well ahead of us. They're certainly not anymore. So it is incumbent on us, I believe, to actually be a creator of employment, and a creator of employment in sectors where we actually need to grow, and this is what we're actually doing. This is the contribution that ESB makes to the Irish economy every year, about £2.5 billion. And you can see all the different areas how that's made up: purchases, payroll, taxes, rates, foreign sales through ESB International, and dividend. And this is the impact that the investment has made in terms of the reductions in outages. When we had not invested in the network for many, many years, have invested heavily in it over the last number of years, and we are going to continue to invest. We have one of the most automated networks across Europe at the moment, and that is going to be a big advantage to us as we get into the whole smart grid area. All across Europe, there's been a huge underinvestment in the electricity sector. It's a big problem now, but we're going to continue with our programme. We said that we'd create 3,700 jobs, and we have 1,300 jobs in the contracted sector. We're going to keep those. There's a lot of anxiety that we might stop our capital investment programme. We're not doing that, so we're going to keep those jobs going. And as well as creating jobs in the economy, we are committed to finishing the training of the FOSS apprentices. The first 100 have actually gone through and are now qualified apprentices. These are people who were let go from other employment before their training was finished. So we're working with FOSS to get through that. And we're also, instead of taking on the normal number of apprentices this year, for the next number of years, instead of taking on 45 trainee apprentices, we're taking on 100. And we're developing it into a 6-year programme, whereby the first 2 years everybody does their standard trade training, and we will train those people over that period of time to bring them up to university entry level. And after 2 years, 50 go back to college to do engineering, and 50 continue to do their trade, and that programme has started as well. The areas where we see big opportunities for growth are electric vehicles. And Southern California Edison, I met the people again during the week. We're doing a lot of work in association with them. They are the lead utility now in terms of smart metering and the development of electric vehicles. Electric vehicles was blocked in the past largely by the motor industry, and it's not going to happen this time. It's going to be slow, but we are going to be supporters in rolling the infrastructure out to make sure that that works this time around. In relation to home energy efficiency, we have big targets in the country in terms of energy efficiency, and we have already started a programme where we're going to provide home audits for people where we'll audit your house free of charge, and we'll give you what you need to do to raise your efficiency level in accordance with the standards that have been set out, and give you an idea of where you can get grants for that and where you can get money. All the banks who have now commitments to government to support this sector are prepared to sort of play their part in that. So that's a programme that we feel is going to grow and grow over the next number of years. And when we come to do your audit, we won't be asking who your electricity supplier is. We have an investment fund that we started because I suppose part of this was we've been inundated with people who are saying that if ESB was only with me, I could create the solution to wave technology, but there's loads and loads of people out there. So we've set up a fund. We do intend to invest in new technologies, and not all of them work, but we believe that some of them will. And the whole smart grid and smart networks, I won't dwell too much. You could talk about a presentation on its own, but it is something that's developing. It is going to create a lot of employment in terms of the additional infrastructure that has to be developed. And we are redeveloping our head office building, including the famous front. And we're in a competition at the moment, and we believe that it's a good time for us. The building needs something done. It either has to be completely refurbished or rebuilt, and that's what we're going to do. So hopefully you'll see the benefit of that in time to come. So 3 messages. Renewables is a key part of the way forward. We may be supporting it today, but in terms of the way fossil fuels are going to go, we have no other alternative but to be there. And in time, it will pay us back handsomely in terms of having security of supply, having a source of electricity for ourselves on the island, and it will provide stability in terms of price and will go a long way to solving our carbon problems. Price, really significant, and the whole emphasis in terms of price, with due respect to hard-pressed people who have to pay their domestic bills, should be to try and support the job creation sector. And ESB is committed to creating between 3,000 and 4,000 jobs over the next 5 years, which we will report on year in year. Thank you very much.